I can't think of anything more foolish. That was the reaction from former Prime Minister and UN Development Programme Administrator Helen Clark to US President Donald Trump's move today. Mr. Trump says America gives up to $500 million a year to the health organisation, and he has deep concerns about whether that generosity is being put to the best possible use. Helen Clark wasted no time in telling me what she thinks of that.
I can't think of anything more foolish in the middle of a global pandemic, which has gone beyond being a health crisis to being a full-blown economic and social crisis, than taking away money from the World Health Organization, which is so critical in the fight against the health aspects of the pandemic.
Does he have any point when he raises concerns about how this has been handled by who?
In my opinion, no substantive point. Look, at the end of this ghastly matter, and we don't know when that will be, for sure the WHO will do a full review and lessons learned, as it did after Ebola. And after Ebola, where it had initially not responded well, a whole lot of new mechanisms were put in place, and that has put the WHO in a much better position this time to be handling the epidemic. But this is a virus which we knew absolutely nothing about 4 months ago, almost nothing about 3 months ago, and everybody is scrambling to keep up. So in a sense, to defund and make accusations against WHO is to shoot the messenger that's been trying to tell the world for several months that this is serious and countries need to prepare.
President Trump has raised a couple of specific issues, and I want to put them to you. He is particularly perturbed, it seems, by a lack of travel restrictions or advice around travel restrictions from the World Health Organization. And he says that they didn't give advice about restricting travel, and in fact the opposite. And when you look back, indeed, when it comes to travel restrictions, on January 10th they said no travel restrictions advised. January 27th, still the same. A month later, they were still talking about avoiding international travel restrictions. The other thing he has concerned about is the accuracy of information that's been coming out of China. And he is not the only person to raise concerns about that as well. So are those reasonable concerns he raises?
So, of course, he has half a point around the travel restrictions. WHO doesn't advise those. And I think one of its concerns is that countries might be less honest and transparent if they knew there were going to be those sorts of consequences. Obviously, New Zealand also moved by the end of January to stop people who were not New Zealand citizens or permanent residents coming from China or even transiting through China in the previous 14 days. So I understand the kind of sensitivities in the WHO around the travel bans, but countries like the US, New Zealand and many others have got on and put them on anyway. Now, on the issue of transparency, yes, of course, with an authoritarian society which doesn't operate the way the US does or New Zealand does, with our free and open media and ability to say what you want and raise whatever questions you want, things are different. And the reality is that there was knowledge in Wuhan at least a month before the notification of the disease to the WHO. I might say from my experience, Lisa, of dealing with China with such a critical issue, which was over the milk powder scandal back in 2008, our experience was that when we blew the whistle in Beijing, Beijing moved at the speed of lightning. Down at the regional level, they're not always so keen to tell Beijing about a problem. But if you go in at the top, Beijing can act very quickly. And my impression is that it may well be that the regional people withheld knowledge from Beijing as well.
What damage do you think it will do, what Donald Trump has done? Could it have a domino effect? Do you anticipate any other countries deciding they're not going to put money in the pot either?
So you have to think who might follow such a move. There's a very small number of countries, shall we say, who are uber supportive of anything the president might do. But it seems to me that the overwhelming majority of countries are just going to say, look, let's not start blame games on WHO right now. Let's get in behind it as it endeavours to deal with the health aspects of this. The post-mortem on this ghastly pandemic crisis will be done, that's obvious, but let's not take away the support it needs at the moment.
The UN, obviously an organisation that you have immense experience with, so it was involved with Ebola. I'm wondering, is there something that the UN should be doing right now in respect of this pandemic?
Yes, the senior level coordination is not high enough. There has been a crisis mechanism that was activated by WHO some weeks ago, but it's at the Mike Ryan director level. What Dr. David Nabarro, well known to me, who used to advise Ban Ki-moon on pandemic response, has recommended is that the Secretary General should convene a Pandemic Emergency Coordination Council. I think that should be a standing body to be activated whenever something like this arises. And by the way, this is the sixth public health emergency of international concern since 2003. On average, these horrible events are going to come around every 3 years. So a standing capacity, which would be the Secretary General, the heads of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and the Director General of the WHO. Now, their networks are huge. The IMF and the World Bank, they have the ears of every finance minister in the world. And what's going to release money now for a response that will fight the health aspects of the virus and the economic crisis and the social crisis is the finance ministers. They're incredibly important. And by the way, they're meeting virtually this week as well for the spring meetings. And we are starting to see some positive announcements, not big enough, but positive coming out of there. So that's the first thing. The SG should act on that. Secondly, the Secretary General himself, of course, could, under Article 99 of the UN Charter, go to the Security Council saying that he formally puts it in front of them that this is a threat to global peace and security, and ask the Security Council to make a resolution to that effect. And Security Council resolutions are binding. If it says that, as it did with Ebola 6 years ago, and calls on member states to use all necessary means to fight it, that really ups the ante for global coordination.
Helen, lovely to talk to you. Before we go, how is your bubble going?
Well, I'm actually enjoying being in my own home and neighbourhood for a longer period of time than probably since I was leader of the opposition. So, for me, there's an upside, but the downside is I haven't been able to drive down to see my dad, who's 98. I'm not myself going to the supermarket. Peter gets sent out on that errand. But I am getting a lot done. And I think we're going to be looking at the way we work through this and thinking, yes, we could do a lot through Zoom and Skype and Teams and these other mechanisms. Maybe we don't need to get on that plane.
Yeah, so what is going to change after all of this, do you think? Because it's not going to be the same, is it?
It is definitely not going to be the same. We're going to be using these platforms for connecting virtually a great deal more. I have major meetings coming up of international boards I chair for Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, headquartered in WHO. We're doing it in the way I'm talking to you now. And maybe we'll be doing that for a while, because until there's a vaccine, who of us can travel and get insurance? In busy lives, you don't really want to be coming back from a week-long meeting and sitting in a hotel at Mangere for 2 weeks. So we're going to have to get used to working like this.
And that was Helen Clark.